Good morning to those on the West Coast, good afternoon to those on the East Coast, and welcome to everyone in between. I am Lauren Jones, and I am proud to be part of the Apprenti team. As the Massachusetts director, I am even more proud to introduce to you one of our very own apprentices from my home state. Please join me in welcoming Alfred Ante, an IT business analyst at Eversource.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon or good morning from where you're listening from. My name is Alfred Ante, and I am one of the 1,000 apprentices hired, thanks to Apprenti and the companies like my employer, Eversource. Apprenti is an impactful connector, bringing together tremendous resources that help apprentices like me advance in the tech field. From working with incredible set of training instructors to preparing hiring managers who have mentored and supported my on-the-job training, I could not be more grateful for my experience at Apprenti. Prior to my coming to the United States in 2017, I was an entrepreneur in Nigeria. When I tried to navigate the next steps to support my career in the United States, I needed to find the right program that could help me gain the right skills and support my family, which was very important to me. You cannot put a price tag on the experience I got from my Apprenti. It was actually something. The crash course accelerated my skills, and today I am contributing to Eversource by managing data for company needs in 3 states with over 5,000 employees under it. I love being an IT business analyst for Eversource, and I could not be more happy with my experience here at Eversource and Apprenti as a whole. This is why I'm incredibly honored to introduce to you the co-founder of and the executive director of Apprenti, Jennifer Carlson. My story is just one of many others, thanks to Jennifer Carlson's vision and leadership, and thanks to the leadership of Apprenti as a whole. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Carlson.
Well, thank you, Alfred, and I appreciate the introduction. But we're nothing without you, apprentices like you, and all the hard work that you've put in. So congratulations on accomplishing everything that you have, and thank you for all of your hard work. And thanks to Eversource as well for giving you this opportunity to grow and thrive, but also for their vision and understanding the role that apprenticeship could play in helping them expand their resource systems. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
So why are we here today? And we appreciate everybody joining us on this call. And we understand that people will probably come and go a bit throughout the couple of hours that we have with you, but we promise we will make best use of your time. And the conversations today revolve around cultivating tech talent. All companies are tech companies today. So we're all competing in the same space. How do we cultivate inclusivity in tech as a second conversation that immediately dovetails into the idea of apprenticeship. And in the end, we will kind of summarize with some actionable steps that companies can be thinking through at this critical time. 2020 has been a little bit of a setback for all companies, but it's also given us a unique opportunity to think about how we plan going forward. And we're seeing a lot of momentum going into 2021, and the tech sector isn't slowing down. So with that said, the challenges that our country is facing with regards to tech in particular, let alone our workforces, focus on everything from how to adapt to remote work environments, how do we adapt for COVID, and what is the long-term implication of COVID on our workforce, getting Americans back to work since we're still in double-digit unemployment, and all of the other hiring opportunities that we're really having very comprehensive conversations around for race and diversity hiring, and the need to do a better job of incorporating that into tech where it has been severely underrepresented for quite some time. We need to bridge the tech talent gap as the country had 3.9 million unique jobs in the sector posted in 2019. And while we'll see a dip in 2020 due to COVID, we're not seeing that reflected in 2021. And the Department of Commerce has forecasted a net new creation of 5 million more tech jobs over the next 6 years. That net new cannot be met exclusively in the higher education set. We need to bridge a tech talent gap with a holistic system that allows us to create a second option or a second on-ramp, if you will, into the tech sector. And that means we're going to have to invest as an industry in creating that talent, since we cannot scale the higher education system fast enough to meet our needs. We have a lot farther to go on this front, and we're going to have some incredible conversation here in the next couple of panels. You're going to hear from employers who are putting apprenticeship to work in their companies, and how that system can be stood up to create more talent. If we just open the aperture a little bit farther than the one we've sort of restricted ourselves to, thinking through the 4-year college degree requirements and that ideal 3 to 5 years minimum experience, which we won't create more of until we actually invest in doing that. You'll hear the advantages that apprenticeship can have in terms of bringing diverse backgrounds. And that diversity is not just ethnicity, but also viewpoints and skill sets that we can benefit from as an industry as they onboard. We can close this tech talent gap domestically with the millions of people in our own backyard if we choose to make an investment in that talent. So cultivating tech talent with apprenticeship is our first panel out of 2. We're going to hear from leaders at Cengage and VMware on why their companies have tapped both Apprenti and the idea of apprenticeship as a model for bridging that tech talent gap. They're going to talk through what the operationalization of that looks like, how they're engaging with it across multiple markets, how they're thinking through diversity at a culture level to change the structure and infrastructure of their organization, and how they're getting mid-level management to think about how to onboard talent that needs to be cultivated, and not only invest in the college rank, but also a secondary pipeline that has a wider age range and experience set coming in. We're also going to have a second panel that is equally as important, cultivating inclusivity in tech. And we're going to talk through with a number of companies what that culture change looks like. How important is that to us, and what we can be doing right now to think through how we do this different on a go forward basis. Returning to the way things were pre-COVID is important, but maybe isn't what we want to do in its totality when we have an opportunity to shift the paradigm. And finally, we're going to close with those action steps. And we're going to bring that full circle by walking you through some backdrop on what apprenticeship is, what engagement looks like, and what role Apprenti can serve for you in helping to support that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rainer Golick, both a close colleague of mine. He's the chair of the Apprenti Massachusetts Advisory Board. He was instrumental in bringing us to the state of Massachusetts and working with companies there to get them on board with the idea of apprenticeship. He sits on a number of publicly traded boards and understands what companies need, has a lengthy career in the tech sector prior to that at the C-suite, and interestingly enough, comes from a German heritage, so he's uniquely qualified to discuss the implications of apprenticeship and how that's worked at other locations. So Rainer, I will hand that over to you, and thank you in advance for being willing to moderate the panel for us today.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate everything that you and your organization is doing. Having grown up in a country where apprenticeships is the norm, actually more people come to their careers through apprenticeships than they do through college, where I'm from in Germany. It's nice to see this model starting up here. So on my panel, I'm joined by Jim Chilton, who is has been a CIO at 4 or 5 companies at this point, so a real veteran, and also someone who is on the boards of a number of very interesting startups in the Boston area. And Yvonne DeSalvo, who has been an HR executive in the Bay Area, mostly around tech companies for quite some time. So we've got some two very interesting perspectives here that I think will provide some nice input to people who are considering the concept of apprenticeship. So Jim and Yvonne, welcome.
Thank you.
So let me start with a question that I'm going to throw to both of you. And so, why don't you start with you afterwards, just so we don't talk over each other. why did you even think about apprenticeships, right? You probably all have a hiring model that you're used to, and you've got a whole program in place, and it's, I'm sure, working great. And then all of a sudden, some folks come along and ask you to do something differently. And so, why did you consider this different approach?
So first off, Reiner, thank you very much to you and the Apprenti team for inviting me to be on the panel. This is, I'm excited to be here and excited about talking about this topic. But what intrigued me about the apprentices and the apprenticeship program is how it grows. And for us, it was around the software developer role, but how it grows that community. We all know how hard it is to find talent. And then once you find talent, to keep talent in your organization. And although VMware and a lot of our companies had a lot of strategies that help to attract different groups of individuals, the thing that I found most common is that they all had college degrees, they all had computer science degrees. So I felt like even though we were tapping into returnships or other programs, it was always that same community. We weren't growing the pool. And so when I first met Apprenti, that was the thing that really attracted me to it, was that here is an opportunity to grow that pool and think outside of the very traditional pathway into tech. And I also thought that there was a great connection into VMware as, we believe in a growth mindset. Right. And so, what you started your career for may not be where you end up in your career, and moving through the organization is really important. And so this, applied to apprenticeships is that on steroids. And then finally, there was a real personal connection for me, because I grew up in a household where, my mom had to sort of reinvent herself when she was in her 30s while raising 6 kids. And so it was really sort of instilled in me, your choice in career when you're in your early 20s doesn't have to be your choice in careers, throughout your entire life, and that we all have the capacity to learn and to do different things. So I think it was all those things. There was a lot more I learned through the program, but those are the things that really attracted me to the apprenticeship program in the beginning.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like the two themes here is, one is a new source of talent, right? We all know the people graduating from the computer science programs these days are all kind of look the same. And I point out personally that when I got my computer science degree, there are more women doing computer science than there are today, which is not exactly the trend we'd like to see. And then the second thing is, as you point out, there's a lot of really talented people, really smart people who might just not go through the traditional path. So Jim, can I ask the same question for you as well, in terms of why you guys thought about the apprenticeship model? Again, I'm sure you had your standard hiring sources. I'm sure it was all going well, but you decided to take a risk in this area, and just curious what drove you to do that.
Well, thank you, Reiner. And it is a interesting question. First of all, you're very persuasive, as is Lauren, so that didn't hurt. But I think the, why Apprenti, why now? I think Yvonne covered some of these points, but I do think we wanted to find new sources of talent. And we knew, particularly here in Boston, I think, is that, this is a super competitive market, especially competitive from a technology perspective. So finding technologists in Boston is a really hard thing to start with. But there's 2 dimensions that we cared about at Cengage, was both getting and retaining the technology talent, but also recognizing that it should be a representation of the city for which we are within. In the talent pool that I was seeing as someone who joined Cengage about 3.5 years ago, didn't look at all like the demographic in Boston. And that was a problem for us, because we wanted the company, and we continue to be a company of learners, built for learners, right? I mean, we're in the education system. So part of what we do for a living is enable education. And so having a pool of talent of people who are capable, interested, and competent about the skills that they're interested in, we also recognize can't come through this one path through higher education. And so I think since we fundamentally believe those things, Reiner, it made it easy for me to jump onto the idea of what could we do with apprentices inside of Cengage and leverage the Apprenti program. So I was piqued by the curiosity of the approach. And I think the second part was that we also wanted to have people ready to do the job. You know, we can talk about all the other benefits of the program, but one of the key things is that when the apprentices show up, they're well prepared. These are people who are trained at that point, selected by us and put in place to help us in the specific needs that we have. So we felt really good about what we were going to get out of the program from that perspective. So I think those two things were some of the key reasons for us, but I think that the primary one was really this new funnel of talent that we were not seeing before, of qualified, willing, and able candidates that we wanted to be part of Cengage.
That's great. And I think that the kind of second to last point, I think, is actually particularly interesting, right? To have, you know, when people think of apprenticeships, most people worry that, hey, I'm getting people who don't know anything yet, and I have to teach them everything. I think what you point out here is that the way this program is structured, not only is there a lot of education up front so that people are pre-trained, but more importantly, that you get input into what that training is. And so as a result, the people have a lot of the training that's very relevant to the kinds of things that you're doing, which I think is in some sense different than a lot of the traditional sources and real positive. Yvonne, whenever you try something new, you're taking some risks, right? Especially if you're out there putting your neck on the line, and you know, within your organization, that's all looking at you a little weird as you try this, suggest this new thing. So how did that go? What kind of risks did you perceive, and how did you manage them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, there are, like you said, there's a lot when you do something new, and so, you know, for me, it's sort of I sort of took it in steps, right? The first thing I needed to find was an executive sponsor. Because I knew that this wasn't something that was on the HR roadmap at this point. And so, but even if it were on the HR roadmap, you need headcount, and the headcount comes out of the business, right? And so I needed to find an executive sponsor who was willing to put some budget towards this and take a chance with me, right? On something that was sort of an unproven concept. At least at VMware, it was an unproven concept. But once I had the executive sponsors, then it was sort of the hurdle of getting the mind share of the hiring managers. And because I remember still the first conversation I had with them, they were sort of looking at me like, you want to hire who for what jobs, and how does that happen? Because you know, their careers started in that very traditional, right, 4-year college degree. I get recruited out of college and, you know, move right into the path. But again, I reminded them that they were selected specifically from their executive sponsors because they were the best hiring managers in the organization, right? And that they have a reputation for cultivating talent and investing in their talent. And so, you know, kind of take this journey with me and help me learn, help the company learn. And it really is a pilot. It's a learning journey for all of us. And so I've got their mind share around that, and it turned out that some of them are the biggest advocates for this program, and it's just absolutely amazing how, you know, everybody just kind of you know, once they start getting exposed, really start sort of leaning in and figuring out ways to help make this happen. And then I'd say that the last risk was big, was HR in of itself. So I come from the HR organization, and so I was smart enough to know that I wouldn't be able to just sort of throw this onto their priority list in the middle of the year. And so I decided to work with the business unit to bring these individuals on as contractors instead of employees. Because if they come on as employees, then absolutely HR needs to be at the at least in our organ, it has to be at the table, make sure we have the right comp structures and job structures, and the systems can accept these roles and things like that. Are we offering the right benefits? Lots of questions. But if we bring them in as contractors, then it's all laid out in the SOW, right? And it's much more, the business leader has a lot more autonomy at that time. And for me, having that MVP, right, that minimal viable product, it's like this program can scale quite a bit. There's lots of investments we can make, but right now, for me, the first step was I needed to prove that we can teach software developers inside the company, right? We had the right leaders to do that. And so I kept very focused on sort of the first 12 months, let's prove we can teach people. And then once we have that, then the rest of it can come and we can build from there. The second year, do we bring the next cohort in as employees, things like that. So I think keeping it very sort of, what is the one or two things that we really want to prove with the first concept was really helpful. And that kind of kept me personally off the ledge sometimes, because you do feel like you're on an island by yourself occasionally. So.
I mean, it's great, particularly, I think the comment that you made that most people who are initially quite skeptical, once they experience the program, have become advocates. And we've seen that across the board with our employers. You know, it's certainly, I can't speak for the entire national market because I'm not entirely familiar with it, but I know in the Boston market where we have quite a few employee partners, they've all come back for seconds, so to speak, and thirds. We haven't lost a single employer yet, so which is great. Well, Jim, let me ask you the same kind of somewhat similar question, right? You know, one of the things, people have a certain way of hiring, particularly the line executives, such as yourselves, and now you're asking everyone to do things differently. Not only your management team who's they're hiring, the HR team, right? Because this year came in through a different direction, the legal team, and the thing that people hate the most of anything in life is to change their way they do their work, right? People are creatures of habit, and people hate changing their habits. So you had to get people to change.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
How do you approach that?
It's exactly the opposite side of what Yvonne was describing, is that, you know, change is hard, and change that is in place for decades. And I think what's described is how you recruit and get people in this country has been the same way for decades. And so when you're going up against something like that, yes, change is really difficult in that case. And I think for me and my team, it was really around actually HR and for legal, about how do you convince people that this is a new way to get talent. And again, leveraging in the understanding of what's happening in Europe, that this actually exists in the world, that this is a way to do this. And that there's these capable, talented people who we haven't found any other way, that are on the doorstep to participate with us, but we have to find and get them in the company in a different way. And so it did take a lot of persuasion and getting through that internal red tape and the obligatory stamps and forms that have to be filled out. I can say now, as someone who has 8 apprentices, 2 that have converted into employees and plan on 6 more or more next year, it's worth every ounce of effort that I put into it. But it does take effort. You have to put some effort. You have to believe in what you were doing. And I do, and I did. And I think that helps. So yes, I had to send out a couple of emails. I had to have a couple of meetings to make sure this carried its way through the process, particularly for those first 2 that we wanted to get in the door. Once in the door, the people that were involved that I was so struggling to persuade before became the single biggest advocates for the program. These are people who believed and saw the other side of this in a way that only became real after you tried it. So I would say to the people that are considering it is that you have to get through it and you have to believe it enough, but there is enormous dividends on the other side of this. And I do think that, again, it's easy for me to say now, is that we've had incredible success when I look at the diversity of the people that we brought in from the very first 2 to the most current 2. And we've always bring them in pairs. so that they have someone to work with. And yeah, I think the only other thing is inside the company, Reiner, is that there is this, you have to believe that you want to grow talent from within. You have to believe that getting people in through the apprentice program, and I think you've said this before, Lauren certainly has, is that people say it's too good to be true. And it is. And I think when they hear that and you see this, is that the candidates we talked about before, coming in qualified, ready, willing, and able, but appreciative. These are employees that are joining you and are appreciative of the opportunity for which you've engaged in together. And that doesn't happen every other day, and that doesn't happen any other way, at least certainly not the way I've experienced. So I think it is a paradigm shift, but I think once you break through it, it's remarkably beneficial to the company and to all of those involved.
It's great. Maybe if I pull out two things here, I think one is that the attitude of the employees that you get here is so different. I think most of us have experienced this, particularly with the kind of the recent graduating classes, of the last 5, 6, 7 years. When they come in and work for our companies, their attitude tends to be, yeah, you are so lucky to have me. And if you don't keep me happy, I'm out of here. And I think that these employees are quite different in the sense that they are so grateful that you are having them and that you're giving them this opportunity. I've seen that certainly. The number of apprentices I've talked to who've talked to me, hey, you've changed not only my life, but that of my family by providing this opportunity that otherwise was not available, right? I've got the talent for it, but I couldn't get at it is quite impactful.
Yeah, I think that last point, Reiner, just to build off that, is that how often do you really get the opportunity to help somebody change the trajectory of their life? How often do you get to do that, really? And to think that you're part of that, even a small part of that, I don't know how anybody couldn't want to do more of that.
Especially while they're also doing great work for you. So it's like
exactly.
which actually gets me to the next question I want to ask both you guys, and I'll start with Yvonne maybe, is how have the apprentices done so far? In terms of the performance you're seeing. I know Jim is a couple rounds into this, so we may have more track record, but Yvonne, why don't you start and hand it over to Jim.
Yeah, so we've seen some great success. So we had during this last year, we acquired Carbon Black, and so they came in with an apprentice program that they converted to hires. And then in the cohort the first cohort pilot that we've set up, we're in the process of doing those conversions now. And so we're kind of settling in on roles and groups and things of that sort. So I don't want to overshare there, but the contributions that they have made, the diversity of thought that they've brought into the teams, the sort of the hunger that they have to learn, and you just absorb, and their capacity to absorb over this last year has really surpassed, I think, the expectations of the managers. And so it's, again, as we continue down this path, as month after month kind of went along, they became more and more advocates for this. And they would start coming forward, Jim, to your point about like, and I have this idea, and how about we do this instead? Or, and so that's been really amazing to see. We did learn that there was one particular group that was probably not the right fit for a variety of reasons. It was a group that had to that worked on like the entire stack, and there had to be a lot of institutional product knowledge. And so in hindsight, we've learned that focusing on teams that have sort of more focused remits and things, or product size versus depth of an entire integrated stack of solutions is probably a better fit. but that wasn't because of the individual. Once we move the individual to another team, they've been just a star. So
that's great. Yeah, no, we're hearing that across the board. So Jim, maybe just for you, in terms of how have they performed just as employees, as in terms of just executing on the jobs that you've assigned them to?
They've done great. And like I said, we've got 8, 2 have converted into permanent employees. It's interesting, Ronnie, the last 2 we got in the mid of COVID, and I was nervous about that. I was nervous about, this is hard enough for the managers and even harder for the apprentices to come into an environment, and yet they've been remarkably successful as well. And so I think it's a testament to the program is that their readiness and willingness to be able to do this is demonstrated in how they attack the jobs and opportunities that we've given them, right? So you do see that interest, that commitment, and you don't see that every day, unfortunately, but you certainly see that. I've seen it with every single one of the apprentices. So like I said, I'm thrilled with the program. I'm thrilled with the 8 folks that we brought in. We brought in software developers, IT business analysts, and cybersecurity analysts. So we've sprinkled across kind of my organization. And the other thing that's been really great to watch is the managers of these folks and the people around them, right? This community kind of embraces the idea that you're bringing people in and helping developing a path about how people can ladder up in the company, how they can continue to develop and evolve from where they are. And so I think that has helped support them and make them feel like they are part of something special and not just, so often you see companies make the mistake with intern programs where they're like, well, yeah, the 2 interns are in the closet doing some work, or the interns are buried over in the staircase. No, this is people that are part of the department. They're part of the group and they're part of the growth for the company. And so I think it's been a great opportunity, I think, for the apprentices, but also for me and my team about developing the leadership of the group. So the vice presidents, the directors, the people that report into my organization, recognizing this is part of their job too. This isn't just an idea. This is something that we should make a permanent part of our fabric and how you develop organizations. And so I think it's gone really well for us. I think we have a culture at Cengage that embraces this. We know about learning. We know about teaching. It's what we do for a living. And we know that there's only a few things you can't teach: character, will, and some of these things are some of those things you cannot teach. And so we believe that if you bring in these super talented people who have all this upside potential, we can teach them a ton more. And so I think, like I said, it's different for Cengage because it's at the core of what we do. But I do believe that the Zoom world and all of this for Cengage and how we behave and act, it's allowed this to be really successful for us because we don't have a Zoom session inside of Cengage where everybody's not on their video. There are no black screens at all. Everybody's on all the time, and you're part of that all the time. And so I think the culture and who we are and what we believe, I think has enabled and contributed to how this program could be successful with us. But I think it could be successful anywhere. I really do.
No, that's great. And actually, maybe just 2 points to highlight. One is, some people, when they initially get introduced to apprenticeships, they think it's an internship. And as you point out, it has nothing to do with internship. Internship is someone's in for a few months and then they go back to whatever they were doing before, and they're really just a temporary person in the team. That's why they often end up in the closet, as you said. These folks here are permanent employees. They are just from a different source and a different source of talent that you'd otherwise not have the privilege of having access to. So I think it's one point to be made. And I think the second point that I'd like to make is the last thing you were talking about, which is the importance of training and that being part of the day-to-day job. And to me also, it's kind of like there's a lot of paychecks we get. One is called the emotional paycheck. And whenever you can make a difference in someone's lives, in their life and do something good for the company at the same time, that's one of those good emotional paychecks you can get on the job. Absolutely. So let me, in the few minutes I have before we go to Q&A, let me just end with a question, again, same question to each of you, but from slightly different perspective. Yvonne, kind of, if you're an HR executive out there, you're thinking about adding this to the mix in terms of the hiring sources, what advice would you give to an HR executive who's thinking that through? And then Jim, I'm going to ask you the same question from a line executive perspective.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be take a chance, right? It's like, imagine what the worst case scenario is that, we come out with some learnings from this, right? We learn about ourselves as leaders, we learn about the organization and things like that. And then also, as I mentioned before, what's the minimal viable product that you can start with? I think it's been my experience that when we think about these things from an HR perspective or from a business operations perspective, it's like we have to get every T crossed, every I figured out. What's the compensation? What's this? What's the benefit structure in this? And think creatively about, well, we don't need to figure those things out if we bring someone in, as I said, like as a contractor, or we don't need to think about year 2 yet, right? Or we actually don't even need to think about this, next 6 months. Let's worry about the first 6 months, and slowly take it on as a bite-sized pieces, and just sort of get through the next quarter, and then sort of get, versus like imagining the entire picture. And then the other thing that has occurred for us, and you'll hear a little bit more about this when you hear from Maritza in a little while, is that we've been able to sort of take that foundation and actually build other non-traditional hiring pathways. And so it's been a great sort of building block for us to say, well, if this worked, then how about this, or this particular program, or this returnship, and things like that. And so it really does open up the mind to the organization and the leaderships about other opportunities that we can pursue. And it didn't always have to be in that very traditional way we started building tech, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I like your point of like, it not only adds this pathway, but just different ways of thinking about pathways in general. So Jim, let me, before we go to the Q&A, let me ask you the same question. Any advice you'd give to a technical executive who's thinking of bringing apprentices in their organization?
Yeah, I think Yvonne covered it, but I do think, Reiner, it's a no-brainer. There is no downside here. And as you pointed out, there's an emotional paycheck component to this as one dimension alone. That is, look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, when's the last time you changed somebody's life for the better? You've got an opportunity to do that. And if you don't take that opportunity, you got to ask yourself why. So park that one for a second. From a CIO, CTO technology perspective, we are always trying to find talent. Gosh, we spend a ton of our time just trying to build up the funnel, to find the people, to retain the people. This has proven to be a great mechanism to find people, have them properly trained and ready for us, and then the retention, their commitment to us and our commitment to them is that you're joined straight away when you select each other through this program. And so the level of retention, I think, is going to be very high with the people that come through this program with us. And I think the other part is that, excuse me, if it matters to you about the pool of people that you have in your team, and it does to me, and it did to me in Segregation before it was trending, and you want your company to look a bit like your community, then this is an important part of what you should use as a recruiting pool, because it is the only pool of talent I've seen in the last decade that actually looks like the community for which the company rests in, and doesn't look like everything else that has the standard path of travel that gets people to your doorstep. This is for the people that don't have the network, don't have the connections, didn't go to the right school, or maybe didn't even finish school. And so I think for that, I encourage you to consider it. I think the other part is that having people that show up ready to do the job that you need and willing to your point, Reiner, doesn't happen every day. This program enables that. So I would encourage people to consider it. And yes, I would say to everyone is that if you're introducing this in your company like I did, you will have to write a couple of emails. You will have to help this process through, particularly the first time. In my experience, once you've done it the first time, it will go fine the second, third, and fourth time. But take the initiative to do it. It will pay you dividends in return that I think you will appreciate. And I think for me, the final point on this one is that, we know that talent has got that equal distribution. It's a matter of finding those people. And this is that opportunity to bring in the people that appreciate that opportunity, that their talent can be recognized through this program that otherwise may be hidden.
Yeah. I think that's a key point. There's a lot of really, really smart, hardworking, dedicated people who just for whatever circumstance of life didn't get the same opportunities in terms of college that other people did. That doesn't make it any less talented, any less smart, any less capable, any less hardworking. So, Lauren, with that, let me hand over the floor to you to lead us through a Q&A session here.
Great, thank you, Reiner, Yvonne, and Jim. That was really, really appreciated the conversation. I think our attendees hopefully did, just based on the chat. We do have time for a couple of questions. So if you haven't submitted a question that you'd like to address to any of the panelists, please do in the Q&A feature that's at the bottom panel of your Zoom window. Our first question, I think, is probably best answered for both Yvonne and Jim. The question we have is, did you find it harder to find an executive sponsor, hiring managers that were willing to incorporate apprentices, or navigating the operational side of HR, or all three? So I think that's probably best for both of you guys to share your perspective on that.
Yvonne, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Jim. So that's an interesting question. I think, so I was very fortunate in that the client leaders that I was supporting were very much like Jim, just recognize there's a problem, there has to be a different way to do this, and willing to take that risk and put some budget towards this. So I would say that I had an easier pathway there. And once I had that, we were able to sort of voluntold, in order to get some of the hiring managers. So I almost hate to say this out loud, but it was sort of the HR, the legal, the sourcing, the billing, it's the back office sort of pieces that were a bit harder to get through. And the good news is I never really got a no, but I did get a lot of questions like, why this vendor? We have a contractor vendor that we use. Why are you bringing in a new vendor? Why are you, it's like, it looks like you're hiring employees. Is this really an employer? Is this a contractor? And on and on and on. And so, they were doing their job. So that's goodness, because, they need to protect us. But it was that was sort of the pathway that was, I think, a little bit more challenging to get through.
Yeah, I would share that as a sentiment as well. I think that for me, it was tough in both areas. I mean, Cengage is a global ed and tech company, for those of you that don't know. And so we've been a publisher for 150 years, and every major higher education institution in this country uses our course materials to develop higher ed programs. So we are immersed in this. And so I had that challenge as well, which is kind of our very model is to provide capabilities for higher education so people can follow that traditional path that we're talking about. And so the executives were remarkably open to this from the get-go. There was no confusion in our company at all about that. I think, as Yvonne talks about, my bigger challenge was actually on the HR and legal side, which was, how do you navigate this? And I think they all had best intentions, as everybody does, that they have a process they have to follow. And this is a deviation to that process. And so it does take some encouragement and understanding and explanation and time to make sure that you've gone through it. I think the other dimension in there, and the part that took me a while to figure out, was, so you covered the top and you got the executives on board and you explained the story and why this makes sense. And then you've gone through all the red tape of how do you get this through HR and legal and make it something that you can do. The part in the middle that I think I would encourage is that is the value that's brought to the people that are the hiring managers, the people that are working, the people that are actually see this as a path, so that it is something you can share inside the company in other ways. So how can we bring in other software developers in other parts of the group, not just in our group? So make this process a permanent part of what you're doing, rather than this is an exception we're doing for Jim and his team. And I feel like for me, it took a little extra effort to make this a permanent part of our future, making it an exception for me and my team, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that, both of you. We have a few more questions that have come through, and I'm just mindful that we probably only have time to answer one more, but we'll make sure that we respond offline to the other questions that come through because we really appreciate the engagement. I think it kind of builds off of one of the last points that both were speaking on, but the feedback you've gotten from the managers, the supervisors, and the experience overall. You talk about that emotional payoff. I think Reiner used that term. Can you just speak to the impact of and the feedback that we've gotten from these managers, mentors, and supervisors, and what other kinds of impacts you've seen within your organization through your partnership with Apprenti and apprenticeships?
Go ahead, Jim. Why don't you start this one?
Oh, okay. Ladies first. You got me flat-footed there. So I think the feedback from the apprentices, of course, has been great. I shouldn't say of course, but has been great. I think the supervisors and the managers has been really good. I think where they struggle was they had to have some responsibility. And again, this is more about the COVID part than it is about pre-COVID. When people were in the office, I think it was easier to do the check-in, to be like, hey, they may not know how we do this or how we do that, particularly around software development, where there's quirky parts of how that world works. And so explaining and helping some of the managers navigate that so that they knew that this was part of their responsibility too. This was not something that rested entirely on the shoulders of the apprentices. But yeah, that's been my experience so far. Every one of the surveys that we've done inside for my team, both for the apprentices and for the supervisors of the apprentices, has been very positive. We've had no negative issues at all.
Yeah, I would agree. It's generally speaking, we've had some positive feedback. I think from the mentors, it really did allow them to get into a much more teaching mode than they would have perhaps in the past, right? We certainly have buddy systems for hiring and things like that, but it's usually more peer based. And so this really puts them in a position where they get to sort of teach, share their knowledge. And I think that and we particularly suggested that they find mentors who may want to move into the management track too, because then this will help them sort of learn that skill of being successful through other people, which is a pivot that people need to make. And I think that that was really helpful. And then, as I mentioned before, with the managers themselves, they just, I was so surprised on how much they got into it, and it became sort of their not problem to solve, but their sort of opportunity for their organization. And I thought about this, and what if I hold this class for all of them? And it was, it became really their goal, which in the beginning it was the GM's goal. Like, I want to try this, and you've been selected because you're one of my best managers. And, shortly after the apprentices came into the session or into VMware, they were like really into it, like just wanting to make this successful for the individual as well as for the company. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that insight and your experience on that. Again, a virtual round of applause for Reiner in facilitating this conversation. Yvonne, Jim, for taking the time. Thank you very much. I think it was really helpful to kick off our first session with hearing that direct experience and perspective from both the HR as well as CIO perspective. For questions we didn't get to in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A feature, we'll be sure to continue to respond to. But now it's time to move on to our second session. I'd like to introduce James Whitfield, who will be the moderator for this second panel. James is the co-founder of Be Culture, where he helps boards, executives, and other leaders strategically mobilize people across their organizations and communities to effectively and sustainably be the culture they desire. James has worked with Apprenti and the WTIA in support of diversity and inclusion initiatives, and we thought he'd be a great voice to be part of and lead this next session, Cultivating Diversity in Tech. James, take it away.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to be here with you all today. We get to have a short but powerful conversation. And we're going to focus a lot on the inclusivity piece of the equation. One of the reasons that I got involved with WTIA is because I was a part of the work that they have done around a call to action to end systemic racism in tech. And one of the things that we know, having done that work, is that it isn't just about the pipeline. It's also about creating the right environment within the organization itself, within the company itself, to make sure that the new diverse talent that have been brought in can feel a sense of belonging, can make sure that it's the kind of place where they can be successful. The same barriers that exist in the pipeline can frequently also show up within the company itself. And so we get an opportunity with 4 amazing panelists, because we have so many panelists, they're going to be super brief in their responses, but we have 4 amazing panelists that we have an opportunity to have a conversation with. And rather than have me try to introduce them, I've asked them to introduce themselves. So here's what they're going to do. They are going to introduce themselves, their long and illustrious careers with a single sentence. And they're going to include in that sentence their very first real job. So with that, we're going to have John, and then Maritza, and then Jessica, and then Luther, and they're all going to introduce themselves. So John, you're up first, and then when you're done, Maritza, pick it up, and then Jessica, then Luther, you'll clean things up for us. So John, go for it.
Excellent. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm John Brown, the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. And my first real job, I was painting homes in the neighborhood at age 13. Summer job, still probably one of my best jobs ever.
Awesome. Great.
I'm Maritza Gamboa. I'm a Talent Acquisition, Diversity, and Inclusion Program Manager at VMware. And my first job ever was beside my lemonade stands, a babysitter, and helping after school programs. I really wanted to be a teacher for most of my childhood, so I worked a lot with kids.
Awesome. Thanks. Jessica.
Hello, my name is Jessica Allen. I am a manager for the Tech Talent Development Team at Wayfair. My first job was waiting tables at a local chain called the Smokehouse, and it was not my favorite job ever.
Awesome. I have also done some food service, not my favorite job. I hear you. Luther.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luther Jackson. I'm a project manager at NovaWorks in Sunnyvale, and where I employ the teamwork skills that I first developed during a 2-week job painting Woodlands High School in Hartsdale, New York for $2 an hour.
Oh, there you go. We're not going to say that tells us how old you are, Luther. We're going to take a pass on that. That was a little bit ago. All right. Well, Luther, we're actually going to pick up with you because it turns out that you're not, don't just have amazing painting skills. You are also a bit of a writer. And you helped through an op-ed with the Brookings Institution, you helped sort of reframe the way that we think about issues in our labor market, moving us away from thinking about a skills gap to an opportunity gap. And so you have sort of created a challenge for us with this narrative shift to embrace a more holistic and nuanced approach to connecting diverse talent to economic opportunity. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that, Luther, as workforce boards like yours and organizations like Apprenti collaborate with the community. What do you suggest as ideal, equitable hiring and mentoring standards for businesses to consider, develop, and implement?
So thank you for that question. A couple of years ago, the Kapor Center in Oakland released its Leaky Tech Pipeline report. And the report built on a statement from founder Mitch Kapor that said, while genius is evenly distributed by zip code, opportunity and access are not. So the report points out that barriers to opportunity and access are evident in pre-K and extend through higher education, the tech workforce, and entrepreneurship. So if you really want diverse talent, I believe that employers need to play a role in working with workforce and educational agencies to patch up this leaky pipeline. And so this means addressing some of the root causes of the opportunity gap: inadequate educational resources, lack of access to professional networks. We heard this in the previous session. A lack of career awareness and mobility knowledge, which I love that phrase. And it's really, how do you get jobs? How does the game work? How do you get from A to B? What is a good job? And the role of mentors, obviously critically important in an apprenticeship program in a company, but throughout one's educational experience to show people the way. And another piece, addressing pervasive racial segregation in our society. It negatively impacts individuals, it impacts communities, and regional economic prosperity. So some companies may see this as outside of their scope, and I get that. But I think all of this is necessary if we want to get diverse talent on the field. So I have a little exercise, a little activity I'd like to challenge companies to think about, is to employ a human-centered design initiative where you interview your Black and Brown employees and with the goal of deeply understanding their barriers. So your goal is really seeking to listen and understand both on the barriers, both on the job and along the pipeline, and then develop internal prototypes to really start testing your ideas with these employees and keeping them on the team. I think that's really, you don't want to assume that you know everything and you know everybody's problem. You really need to listen deeply. I think it's at the end, what I'll say finally is I think it's critically important to see these investments through a lens of enlightened self-interest and not charity, not giving back to the community. Because the problem with giving back to the community is it's not sustainable. It's not what businesses are there for. You want to keep it with the core. The core is talent, and that's the road to go.
Thanks, Luther. Appreciate that. It is important to make sure that we focus on the fact that good diversity and inclusion is in fact good business. It's one of the things that I know I work on as I work with executives and organizations and companies around helping to integrate an equity mindset into their existing business strategy. Because we know, based on research and other things, that is how you advance your business goals, not just through a lens of some sort of charitable outlook. And the good news is we have folks on our panel who have done that work. And so we're going to turn our attention to John and Maritza and Jessica to help us with some of the work that they've already done. All three of you have implemented apprenticeship in your company, and all of you have done all sorts of other things in order to increase a sense of inclusion and belonging within your workforce. We'd love to hear from you about some of the things that you've done. So John, you're up first. Help us understand, what are you all doing around increasing that sense of belonging and inclusion in your workforce?
Absolutely. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak on this. It was really interesting to hear what Luther shared. I agree wholeheartedly that the more we look at bringing in diverse talent and leveraging diverse talent as not a bolt-on or just a separate initiative, but really part of the fiber of everything that you do is critically important. So some of the things that we have done over the years and where the apprenticeship program has really helped us further our objectives at increasing diversity and inclusion at all levels of the organization. So we have internally what we call employee resource groups, where these employee resource groups allow for us to get a lot of intimate detail about, as Luther mentioned, how do different segments of our employee population, what is their experience, right? And we attempt not to gloss over or assume we know. We leverage these employee resource groups to help give us intimate real-time details so that we can ensure that we are modifying our hiring, recruiting, talent management, discuss all of those things can be modified real time based on information. We also have an annual engagement survey where we have data that will tell us how do different segments of our employee base, how are they experiencing, again, their day-to-day work and the culture of the organization. So those are things that we can move to some very quantifiable values that then it comes down to, as was mentioned, as an organization, having the courage and the commitment to take action based on what you see and what you learn. I think an organization, once you learn better, you should do better, right? Once you learn more, you should do more. And so that's something that we've really attempted to focus on. And again, I can't stress how much having yet another avenue for bringing in diverse talent like an apprenticeship program has really helped solidify our focus on not being so laser focused on a single pool for talent, but being able to go and find and get talent wherever it exists and elevating that channel of talent similar to all other channels of talent. So we don't look at apprenticeship any differently or less than we do traditional methods of recruitment. It's a great thing for us. It has worked extremely well. And sitting as the HR practitioner, being the head of HR here at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana, I think it's really helped to have that mindset because it removes the angst from the business areas that are looking to hire, removes the angst from other parties when, as the HR person in the room, being already on board and aware of the benefit of a path like this.
Great, appreciate that. Jessica, you're gonna be up next. What are you all doing in terms of creating that sense of belonging and inclusion?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm going to echo a lot of what John said. So sort of on a Wayfair wide scale, we also have employee resource groups. There are a couple of employee resource groups that really are hugely impactful for our apprentices. So in particular, we have a bootcamp grad ERG, which really focuses on what is the experience of our people from non-traditional technical backgrounds. How do we support them? What are their experiences and how do we sort of support them and their managers to make sure that they feel included at Wayfair? We also have a Women Plus in Tech ERG, Way Out ERG. We have sort of a ton of those that are really there to help create that inclusive environment. The other thing I would say is we have a tech talent development team. That's the team that I'm part of. So we're thinking about not only that onboarding experience. So once we hire these apprentices, how do we help them get up to speed and help them feel included throughout that process? But how do we support our technologists holistically, sort of as they're on their journey of learning? So thinking about upskilling, you need to learn Java. How do we do that as an organization? And how do we provide those opportunities? And creating senses of community. So who are we? What is our culture? And sort of what do we do to help folks feel included? So those are the things I would say that we sort of focus on.
Great. Maritza, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I love what John and Jessica have said. I hadn't heard of an employee resource group for non-traditional talent. I'm going to borrow that if you don't mind. I really like that. We are very similar. We heavily rely on our employee resource groups. For this Apprenti cohort who just started yesterday, actually, we reached out to our employee resource groups and asked if they would be open to mentoring our new hires. And it was incredible. We have 10 Apprenti joining and we got 64 people applying, wanting to mentor new hires, which is so great. So each Apprenti coming in has a technical mentor who's on their team and can answer the day-to-day questions. And then we partnered them with a community mentor or someone from an employee resource group to help just get to know the VMware culture a little bit better. We're not in the office, so you can't run into people in the lunchroom. or at events. And so the hope is that they can be that piece on culture and inclusion and invite them to events and get to know the company. And then the other thing I'll just add is making sure you're working with managers who, believe in this and are invested. We are not forcing any managers, but we want managers who believe in this amazing talent and are going to help them grow. And I know Yvonne touched on that a little bit beforehand, but that has been so great. Our managers have been very invested, and I think it goes a long way when, like you said, they believe in the talent and they know that this is tech talent that they want to hire.
Well, I appreciate that, Maritza, because you also teased out the importance of mentorship in a way that's very similar to what Luther said. I'd also just want to sort of double click on what Luther said in terms of the importance of that human-centered design. And you can sort of take the idea of an employee resource group, and that gives you an opportunity, right? It gives you a test case of a place to go in order to do that deep listening and that deep understanding. So John, we want to go back to you then and talk to you specifically about mentoring, which has already come up. How have you all built in mentoring elements in order to support diversity and inclusion and belonging for apprentices at Blue Cross Blue Shield?
So we've done a couple of things, and some of which was already mentioned. So we take both a formal and an informal approach. So from a formal perspective, when an apprentice comes in, we literally assign them with an individual who has experience in that particular space. We also try to pay attention to, as best we can, other elements that would make for, like you would any other mentoring relationship, right? If there are similar interests that you can combine that would allow for not only the technical sort of job related experience to go as well as possible, but also trying to assess it, on the personal side as well, right? So from a formally we assign an apprentice with a mentor where they are, can walk alongside and learn and grow in a formal capacity. But we also attempt to make available to our apprentices sort of the more global view of all that's available, so that even with a formal mentor, we find as well that the whole, and it's challenged now with us being separated due to the pandemic, but you try to get them engaged in related activities where, based on their particular interest, they can find the ability to be sort of social and sort of engage with other members of the organization outside of their formal mentor, because it's another way of increasing sort of the stickiness and increasing retention when they feel that, okay, there's a place for me here, right? I fit in somewhere, and we don't try to force that. We believe that we have a culture that is diverse and inclusive enough where everyone can find a place here. It's a matter of not being so restrictive that we limit their contact points. We provide the formal mentor, but we give them exposure to all else that is available. And we've seen that pay dividends for us.
Great, appreciate that. Thanks, John. I'm going to come back to you, Maritza, because you've already touched on this a little bit, some ways that you help with onboarding, but you have been a champion for programs that do similar things as Apprenti. And so we're curious, what sorts of tools and programs have you developed in order to help with that onboarding process, in order to help pull people through, in order to increase what John was talking about there in terms of stickiness?
Sure, absolutely. So I think of it as like a pre-onboarding and then post when they've started. So with Apprenti specifically, the pre-onboarding and the partnership has been incredible. With Apprenti, we will host some sort of interview kickoff meeting with everyone who's interviewing. And so that's really to explain to them, this is what a blind resume looks like. Don't be alarmed. Don't go looking for them on LinkedIn. It's that way for a reason. And these are the questions you can ask that are not technical, since they haven't started technical training, but you can still evaluate for potential. And then once interviews are over, they're in technical training for about 18 weeks, which is a long time. So with Apprenti, we hosted 2 meetings for managers in that time to prepare them for onboarding. So we started something called a work plan. And it's a little difficult. How do you plan out for an entire year? But let's try and get some sort of bullets down on what milestones look like. So when you're at 6 months, you don't forget where they were or the progress they've made. So that's before they started. And then once they come on board, we really focus heavily on the first 90 days. We think that is such a crucial time. So we have the peer and community mentor I mentioned. We also have a 9-day technical training. The 3 days are what a normal, anyone joining VMware would get, but we made a custom 6 extra days of training for them. And that's on their 3rd week. So the idea with that was, let's give them 2 weeks, set up their laptop, get to know their team. We all know it's not easy getting the laptop set up right away. And then that 3rd week, go into this 2 full weeks of training. And then we're also working with some external vendors to provide some emotional intelligence training. So equally important to technical training is that EQ side, especially in a pandemic when we're all working from home. So I guess to shorten up my answer, we're trying to get them super involved in their first 90 days, meet people, get involved in different activities. And while that won't stop, of course, after the 3rd month, it will definitely slow down. But the hope is at that point, they are acclimated and can get off and running.
Well, that's awesome, Marisa and Jessica. It sounds like that's very similar to some of the work that you all are doing. My understanding is that the apprentices get to join other early career hires in a 3-month program. Can you talk a little bit with us about what that is and how that helps increase that sense of belonging and inclusion?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We certainly do. We spend 3 months with sort of our new hires before we inject them onto engineering teams to start working. So as our apprentices join, they're joining in with other people from a variety of backgrounds. They might be from other boot camps or from a campus, or they might be internal transfers who taught themselves sort of how to become software developers. So we run this 3-month program, and I think, throughout it, we're always reminding everyone that it's a journey, right? We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different things that we're going to learn really fast, and some things are going to take us a while, and that's okay. That's why we spend that time up front with people. One of my favorite things to do on day 1, when I get everyone in a room, or in this case on a Zoom call, I'll ask, hey, we're going to learn this technology in the next couple of months. Raise your hand if you have any experience with that technology. And the last time I asked that to a group of 40 people, 0 people raised their hands. So just really reinforcing the fact that we're all in this together. We all come from a variety of backgrounds, and that's okay. That's why we're here, and we're here to learn together. So I think that is one way that we really try to sort of reinforce that sort of inclusion, even though people are from a variety of backgrounds. I think the other thing that is really important, and this is sort of perhaps my personal importance, but something I'd love to say out loud is, I think we acknowledge that imposter syndrome is real. We talk about it, we train our managers on it. We know that week 3 at a company is the hardest week, right? That's when you start to think, gosh, am I in over my head? It's been a couple of weeks. I should really know how to code this problem. And so in week 3, we have one-on-ones with people, and we talk about that, right? We say, you're not alone. Have you asked any of your peers how they're feeling this week, right? So really, talking about that and reinforcing that it's okay to feel that way, and that it's normal, and that we'll get through it together.
Awesome, Jessica, appreciate that. Well, in our remaining time, we want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear one last time from all of you before we turn things over for our questions. And so Luther, in a moment, we're going to start with you. But what we want to hear from each one of you is really what advice would you offer to a company who's in their early stages of designing a diversity and inclusion program in order to build their tech talent? What advice would you give people in their early stages trying to get something like this figured out? So Luther, you are up first for a 1-minute response.
Okay. Well, as you've heard today from the panelists, there's a lot of great work being done, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's number 1. Partner with other companies. Partner with the KPOR Center for Social Impact in Oakland. They're great. Partner with the Workforce Development System. That's a plug for my system. We can help you find talent that you would never discover in 100 years. And keep an eye on the big picture and the root causes. Play a role in helping fix this leaky tech pipeline and this talent ecosystem.
Awesome. You did that in about 45 seconds. So right now, you are in the lead. Let's see how Maritza can do. You are up next. 1 minute. What is the advice you would offer for folks in the early stages?
Sure. My last company was Carbon Black. We were much smaller and had absolutely no D&I foundation. So I can relate to this question a lot. And when we were first starting, the best advice I got was to celebrate the small wins and know that you're not going to change everything overnight. And that's okay because you're working toward it. So really, really take a moment to celebrate. If you get an Apprenti program that launches with 5 people, that's a big deal and that's worth celebrating. Partnering with Luther's company, reaching out to all of us, I echo that. I think reaching out to the D&I community has been so helpful for me, and everyone is so open to give you advice. So utilize us. We're here to help. How'd I do?
You did great. Under a minute, not under 45 seconds.
Fair.
You did a great job. So, John, you're up next. What is your 1 minute advice you would offer for folks who are in their early stages?
First thing I would say is to follow the data. And what I mean follow the data is if you take a look around your organization and you compare it to the community that you work, live, and serve, you will likely find that it looks very different. So that's, I think, catalyst enough to do something. And then the second thing I would offer is to stick to it. There will be a number of barriers and things that will get in the way. And I would just encourage you to stick to it and not give up. It certainly is not only the right thing to do, but it drives tremendous amount of business value. So you're on the right course. So follow the data and stick to it.
All right, right in at 40 seconds. So we have a new leader on the leaderboard. Jessica, what advice would you give to folks in the early stages?
All right. I'm gonna surpass that 40 seconds probably, but I'll do my best. I would say just be thoughtful not only about sort of the hiring process, but also how you're going to support people once they're in the door. So I think, with Apprenti, they do an awesome job at preparing people. But once those people come in the door, make sure they have a mentor, make sure that they have a support system in place, make sure you have an onboarding plan so that you can not only sort of get that diverse talent in the door, but you can retain them and grow them and sort of grow the company culture.
Oh, 35 seconds. We have a winner. Jessica, absolutely, yes. Raise the roof. All right. So, Lauren, over to you for questions from the audience. And if you don't have any, I'm sure we have some additional things to talk about with my very eloquent and very brief panelists.
Yeah, they were brief. They saved us a little bit of time. This is Stacy. I'm going to take over for Lauren on the Q&A side. We do have a couple of great questions, and there's a good chat conversation going on. I'll see if I can tap into that if we run out of topics, which it doesn't look like we're going to do. Thank you all. James, you did a great job keeping us on schedule. So going back to something that we actually heard Maritza talk about, and that's our blind resume screening process. Would love to hear more about what that was like. What's it like to interview someone without any prior information?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will be honest, it's not completely blind. The apprentices do get to submit, I think it's 2 or 3 bullets, but it's their choice on what they want to highlight. So oftentimes if they do have a bachelor's degree or work experience, they will include that, but it's by no means a resume. And so I think it's really that pre-interview training is crucial so that A, they're not shocked when they don't get a resume, but B, they have prepared questions. Apprenti helped create questions as examples for what our managers could ask that are not technical, but get to the core of that ability and potential. And so that was extremely helpful. So I would say giving those examples, getting comfortable ahead of time that there's not going to be a resume, but those 3 bullets should be enough to get you talking. That we never ran into that issue. And then what was really important for us actually was the retrospective afterward. We did get some feedback that some of our managers asked technical questions. And it's interesting because on their side, they were like, well, I didn't think it was that technical. I asked what their favorite app was and how they built it. But to someone without technical experience, that can seem like a very tricky question. And so that retrospective was really, really helpful for the next time around. And you can take that example with you into your interview preps. So I guess to sum it up, you'll get a couple bullets, it'll be helpful, but you're really meant to be present in that conversation and not be so focused on the past, but more on the future and what they're interested in.
That's such a great way to put it. I see John's head bouncing around. Do you want to talk a little bit more about this, or Jessica, feel free.
Yeah, I would just add, and I agree with everything said. The other thing that we've found that was important was to break down what I'll call certain stereotypes, right? When you hear of apprentices, I think there's some who somehow find a way to stratify talent that you're looking for. And somehow an apprentice falls below an intern somehow in the minds of some. And it's trying to re-educate and break down stereotypes and barriers that you have individuals who are coming to the table who have skills, who have talent. And so they should not be looked at differently. It's a different path and a different pool of talent, but one that is just as formidable as any other pipeline that we currently have. And so whether it's a blind resume type of approach or something to just help level playing field, for lack of a better word, it's we found to be very important, and having successful apprentices has helped just further solidify the fact that, you know, being an organization that is very focused and takes seriously our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, it's been a tremendous benefit, helping reinforce what we already knew, but it's having those individuals come in and to perform in a way that helps reinforce that, you see, this is a viable pipeline for us, and because these individuals are performing as well, if not better, than any of our more traditional pipelines.
Great. Jessica?
Yeah, I can just sort of build on this. I love blind resumes. I think they're awesome. You know, at Wayfair, we sort of view it as the folks that are coming to you for interviews, they've already gone through sort of that Apprenti application process, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, that does sort of that aptitude screening. So when folks come to us for interviews, we're not focused on trying to tease apart, can they do sort of the technological work? We're really focusing on, are they going to be a good addition to Wayfair? Do they sort of embody what we think of as our culture? And if the answer is yes, then they're a good hire for us. So that's sort of how we thought about it through sort of that blind process.
That's great. That's a key point. You're right. Jennifer is going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But we have a really interesting question that was posed at the beginning of your session. And so someone's been sitting on their hands waiting to hear back from you guys. And this kind of ties back to what John was saying a minute ago. And that is the individual who asked this in particular is really interested in learning how all of you have worked internally to help avoid that kind of potential to reduce the importance of an apprenticeship, or to put an apprentice in an intern, quote unquote. What have you done? How have you been able to kind of ensure the value and validity of the program that you all are lifting?
I want to
go to John.
Speak to just what I've heard from other companies. The most important thing is that the whole company has a learning culture. And so when the apprentice is there learning, it's nothing new. Everyone's learning. No one's got it. So I think it's important to put them into this rich environment where everyone's learning, and it makes it more comfortable.
You couldn't be more right, Luther. That is great. Okay, does anyone else want to kind of talk about, in particular, what you would basically be suggesting to other people on the call that might help them build out a more successful platform based on what you all have learned or built?
John, I'll jump in and say, and Luther, it kind of ties into where he went with this, which is anything, at least what we found, is anything we can do upfront to acclimate the apprentice to the organization, the culture, the climate, so that they're not seen differently, right? I mean, there are little things that can be done that can actually unintentionally create separation, right? I know for some organizations, if you come in as an apprentice or an intern, you have a different badge, right? It has a different little indicator on it, just so that from a security perspective, they know. It's little things like that that create an unintentional barrier or an unintentional division within the organization that candidly is not needed. Now, I know every organization, they have to do whatever they feel necessary to, from a security perspective, but the bottom line is it took the HR organization to be strong advocates and marketers of the program up front to really try to lay the groundwork. There were still individuals who sure may have had some reservations, but it doesn't take long. I mean, no matter where you come from, we're in Baton Rouge, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, headquartered here, but I'm born and raised in Missouri, right? The show me state, right? It doesn't take long. The moment you have folks to come in and to deliver, it takes away a lot of the other noise, right? And so having these very capable individuals come in was extremely helpful, again, in just furthering the mission that we were already on, because it's very difficult to hold on to some antiquated or otherwise incorrect stereotype or some other notion when you have individuals who are here performing at a level that they were advertised to perform at, right? And so it removed a lot of that noise, but I would say get them integrated and a part of the organization just as quickly as possible. That not only helps them, but I think it has equal value on the rest of the organization to see them as part of the organization and not, again, some bolt on, some adjunct part of they are part of the family. They are an integral part of the work that's being done. So the sooner the better, I think really helps that out.
Absolutely. We do have a couple more questions and just a few more minutes, but Maritza or Jessica, did you want to talk to that question?
I'll just add one quick thing. We had an amazing manager here send an email to her team the week before her apprentice started saying, I'm really excited for this person to join. And this is why I think the program is so important. And it really set the tone for the team coming from leadership, the manager. And she knew that the team was going to have to spend time training and working with this person, but she wanted to make sure they didn't have those stereotypes. They knew how much she valued them and the program. And I think that made such a big difference in this instance. So if you have managers who can do that and help them feel welcome from the start, like John was saying, and set the tone for the team, I think that could go a long way. And it's just an email.
Yeah, and I can imagine, especially in COVID times, that would be so impactful. That actually dovetails to a question that someone just put out there, which is and I know each of you kind of talked about this, but how have apprentices been able to participate during COVID? Has it been any different? And, how's the mentorship of, because both the mentor and the apprentice are virtual, have you put anything in place to change or address that? I will go to Jessica because she's smiling.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. We actually had a cohort of apprentices join us in July. So, I've never seen their bright shining faces in person, but I will one day, I hope. So onboarded them remotely and they've sort of started with their teams remotely. I think the things that we have modified are more periodic check-ins and a stronger mentorship model. So not only did they have that one-on-one sort of technical mentor, they also had sort of me as a resource, and they had some tech leads. And we just really thought very strategically about the touch points. How frequently can they ask questions? That's a really, really important thing sort of for apprentices, or really anyone in their first days, but especially apprentices. How are they asking questions? We had office hours twice a day where we would just open up sort of a Google Hangout for an hour and a half and people could jump in, jump out. Those were heavily utilized. There were, 50% or more of apprentices were in there at any given time, just asking questions and learning together and sort of trying to recreate that very collaborative learning environment, which I think is especially challenging during COVID.
Oh, I'm muted, of course. Okay, I think we're about to wrap up. We're right on time. James, I want to give you a chance to shout out and close out before I introduce our next session. And I want to take a second to thank you all. This has been amazing, and I appreciate your time and collaboration on really trying to lift this conversation and answer questions we've all been thinking about. So James.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And I also just want to say thank you for our amazing panelists. And double click on something that Maritza said, but turn it on its head a little bit. She talked about in the blind interviews how important it is to help hiring managers focus on the future of the talent as opposed to the talent's past. I think one of the other things that's really critical is to help the hiring managers and the entire organization focus on the future of the organization as opposed to the past. It's really easy to set our expectations around how neatly these new people are going to fit with how things used to be. as opposed to how are we as an organization going to change in order to ensure the environment for the future that can, in fact, hold and sustain and create a sense of belonging for diverse talent. And so it's getting out of that past focused mindset and thinking about a more developmental, continuous learning, continuous change mindset that ultimately can make a huge difference in ensuring that the culture develops at a pace that can actually absorb and ultimately hold up and advance new diverse talent within the company.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. I hope you're staying for the next session. I'm really pleased to reintroduce Jennifer Carlson to talk a little bit about next steps and how we all can help each other and work together, take what we've learned today and what we've all been talking about and thinking about, and move apprenticeship forward as we all move towards planning and delivering talent for 2021. There you go, Jen.
Are we here? I'm sorry, I would think I was frozen.
You look good on my end.
Good. You have to love technology.
Better.
So welcome everybody, and thank you again for all of our panelists today. I think these have been two really incredible conversations, and I appreciate all the questions and engagement from our attendees. I think that has led to maybe some dawning moments and some light bulbs going off about how to make apprenticeship work and why apprenticeship belongs as a system. I want to invite everybody's conversations to continue. So feel free to post your questions in the Q&A. Stacy will continue to facilitate that, and I'm going to keep it open. We only have a few slides here, so this is intended to be informational at this point, and I'm happy to address things as we go. You've now heard from employers about their experiences with the product of apprenticeship as a system and how they've had to operationalize it, what some of the hurdles and the challenges were, but also how they've moved through them pretty quickly. You've also heard about how the system improves access to non-traditional pipelines, whether that's from a diversity standpoint, a skill set standpoint, a background standpoint. It's opening the door and opening that aperture just a little bit farther than what our norm has been. And we talked at the very beginning about what the rationale is for why we need to stand up a second system, that the higher education system, wonderful, it serves a purpose for us. It has become what we lean on exclusively. However, the collective input we have from the employers we're working with nationally is a recognition at this point that that college degree is a bit of an artificial or a misnomer for more than half of the jobs that we have in the sector. And that limitation that we've put on ourselves is preventing us from taking advantage of all the raw talent that's in our own backyard. There isn't a system out there that is holistic in completing the talent training that's needed. And so apprenticeship, as has been used in Europe and in Asia and other parts of the globe, is a great way for us to take that forward in the United States. It's new for tech. It isn't new for us if we think about it in the broader spectrum. So let's dive just a little bit deeper into the ABCs of apprenticeship. How do we create that sense of belonging, as James said? How we incorporate, as John was talking about, that talent into our workforce, and how we create that sense of belonging, that they're part of the ecosystem and not different or separate from. But also, what does apprenticeship mean? Apprenticeship is, I think it has a kind of a misrepresentation for us. Historically, it has been the idea of a blue collar job. And in the broader sense, it really isn't any different than what we think of in medicine, which is residency, in law, it's clerking, and certifications in other sectors like auditing, where we have a standardized test called the CPA that everybody on a national footprint has to pass. Apprenticeship isn't blue collar. Apprenticeship is a training system. It is merely the linkage of classroom training and hands-on, on-the-job training. While new in the United States, as I said, not new anywhere else in the world. And we're trying to figure out how do we operationalize it here. It's Apprenti is a flexible and industry-driven model. This is not an if you build it, they will come model. We are a demand-driven product. So we are not pushing talent to you. We are creating the outlet for talent to come to you based on a pull model. So our job and what we're tasked with as the IT sector lead for the US Department of Labor, because we come from industry and the people whose names you're going to see here as your contacts all come from industry in one form or another. Our role is to serve the industry's needs, which means accelerated classroom. It means industry recognized certifications. But when the DOL sat down and said, let's expand the model of apprenticeship to other sectors uniformly, this is not just a technology initiative. It was an idea that 500 companies of the Fortune 500 would stand up their own products within their organizations and do apprenticeship their own way. That is true in some areas of business in the white collar sector, whether that's risk management. If you think of insurance and how adjustments are done, that's generally proprietary company by company. If you think of your credit score, there are 3 competing companies with algorithms that are completely proprietary. They're going to manage those that way. But we look more like electricians than the government gave us credit for. And when we talk about software development, when we talk about data analytics, when we talk about the roles of technology, the data sets, the coding, the directories we work with look the same, whether we're in healthcare, high tech, financial services, insurance, or other. Therefore, if we were to build disparate systems that were all 1 degree left or right of each other based on company egocentrism and definitions, it becomes really hard for us as an ecosystem to make that portable, to make it stand up and be easily consumable on large or en masse. And en masse means across industry sectors as well as across state lines, where jurisdictional management may differ from one state to the next. Our role in part of making this flexible is to show how we can manage a process that benefits all of us as an ecosystem, and at the same time creates a uniform on-road or on-path for non-traditional talent to get into the sector. This is an 18 and over program. So this is about not being tied to I'm registered for college, class, and credit. As an 18 and over, we have over 22,000 applicants in our candidate pool at Apprenti to go to tech jobs that we're waiting for you to say go. You as the companies that we work with or are looking to work with. The youngest person we've placed is 18. The eldest person we've placed is 63. And the median in our program is 32, which means these are people with over 10 years of life experience, work experience in other sectors. And the conversations that were had with the last panel about how do we identify skill sets and interview people without seeing a resume. Part of that bias that's sort of built into our mindset at the company level is to stack rank people on the university they went to and their prior work experience. If we're going to create another uniform talent pipeline to ride alongside our university pipeline and be able to scale and be consumable by all of us, the goal being that in 5 years, 10 years, we're in a position on a national system scale that we can be posting jobs that are college degree or completion of apprenticeship required, then we need to have a belief in the system that there's continuity, that we can interpret without having to understand company by company or department within company by department within company what the value of that individual's knowledge is if they're applying for a job and didn't come from a traditional background. Apprenticeship is a job. It is a commitment by the company to say, we have a job opening. This is a job that we have to fill. It is a headcount, a rec that we're going to put a person into. And that person is a junior level, but in a middle skills job where we all have our greatest pain points trying to fill jobs. And we're going to put those people into these jobs and give them a year to grow into that. And they're going to start with some accelerated classroom training and certifications that we as the industry see value in and say they need those to be successful. And then we facilitate getting that done, getting those people trained. That barrier to entry is that they have to meet and complete the training that you've identified as a requirement for the job. short of that college degree. And then we transition them into work. And you've heard from all of our employer partners about how that transition into job works in partnership with you, whether that's onboarding remotely or orienting them to working with a team environment and helping them be seen as an equitable part of the team and as highly contributory towards an outcome that in the end is working towards retention. If apprenticeship or internships, which is what we've relied on heavily for the last 40 years, shorter in duration, usually focused on college. From one company to the next could be they did something immersively for several months and it was one thing. Another company may have them try multiple roles and occupations over that same period of time, which is why, while consumable for us on an application, we don't put quite as much stock or interest into what they've done because they haven't really demonstrated aptitude yet. You're building an apprentice into being what you want that person to be. And if internship is try before you buy, apprenticeship is train to retain. It's a competency-based system as opposed to a pedigree-based system. And that year of apprenticeship, 2,000 hours, the minimum term of a registered apprenticeship in the United States, comes with a combination of value propositions for the company. You get to pay a training wage. There's economic incentive for companies to engage in this process. And it helps us build a bigger ecosystem of talent. If we talk a little bit now about the roles that the industry has defined, this is by no means a comprehensive list of everything we can do apprenticeship in. These are the roles that industry to this point has said, we know what to do with the apprenticeship. These are the roles we think if we discount the college degree requirement, we think mentorship and apprenticeship can fulfill these roles with accelerated classroom training. And what you see here are roles that are federally approved for apprenticeship in the United States. They've been drafted by us as an industry, and we've just, as Apprenti, collected your feedback as companies and consumers to say, here's what the taxonomy is, the standardized taxonomy of the titling system. We, as each company may call each of these jobs something different, it doesn't change that if we saw this on a resume, we would know that the job is X within our organization. What goes behind each of these titles is a competency list of things that a person is going to learn in the course of a year that would get them up to speed and make them consumable and retainable by us as an industry. And then what you see below that title are samples of the kinds of training that companies have identified as if we get somebody classroom trained to get them to a level of technical competency, when they come to us, we can scale them and on-ramp them into the job. These, again, defined by industry, and these are what industry has identified as middle level jobs, not entry level like your help desk person that frequently kind of stalls in the help desk role, and gives us an opportunity to not only cultivate the talent, grow them, it also then gives us a whole new network of people that we're building into new talent within our organizations, starting them at a junior level. So ideally, we'd love to see companies commit to posting more jobs as junior level talent for these middle skill roles and creating opportunity to do this via apprenticeship. We do have some companies that post jobs now as for apprenticeship only, and then run the process through us because we have got the talent pipeline of diverse people ready to come into those roles. This can be in lieu of the 1 to 3 years of experience that we post jobs at. And it's an opportunity, again, for us to bring on people that are learning the job and trained to retain.
Hey, Jen, a couple questions have been raised about, this is a good list, a laundry list of occupations. What have we found have been like maybe the easiest occupations to list, or the ones that really are more sustainable in an organization?
Sure. So we're not yet at a 5-year longitudinal study, and I'll be happy to share results with you, but we will be transparent with all our data. 40% of the placements that we put into jobs are software development track. And these are folks that, depending on the organization's needs, there are 2 levels of software development. You see them here in the 4th bullet: software developer versus software analyst. The analyst is the more junior level of about 14 weeks of classroom time. And when we talk about accelerated classroom, that 14 weeks is 40 hours a week. They are not holding down another job. They are going to classroom for 40 hours a week. And there is a system in place that gets them from demonstrating that they have base knowledge to actually completing a capstone project. The larger role that our tech companies tend to opt into are things like software development. That's closer to 20 weeks of classroom time, still ending with a capstone project, but a much richer development process. Companies that are non-tech companies but have tech needs tend to lean more towards software analyst, whereas more tech companies are looking at software developer. And then you've probably got our number 2 role is cloud. And now we have a really high increase on cyber analyst. Cyber analyst and IT business analyst are our next 2 largest. And so it's sort of the 80-20 rule here, in that the top 3 are probably 70% of our placements, with the remaining being the other 30. The good news is because this is a nimble process, and the way apprenticeship in the United States works and the ability to bestow the credential that the Department of Labor gives, it sounds like a government sanctioned idea. It is conceptually, but they're only bestowing a completion credential on somebody who has met the sector's definition of that role. So we're the ones informing that. They're the ones conferring that degree or that completion certificate. So the nice thing is we can add new roles as often as we need to as new things come about. If a company doesn't see something listed here, we can create new roles, because the likelihood is high that if a company doesn't see something here, they're not the only ones that will be looking to fill that role. It also gives us the nimbleness of being able to shift as new occupations emerge, as new languages or training platforms emerge. We can ebb and flow with the certifications that are going to support that, or the new training that is needed for a particular occupation.
Jen, I also received a message from someone that had to jump off, so they apologize, but they had a question. And they're curious if they wanted to actually hire in Q1 of 2021. Yep. What are the next steps to bring on apprentices so that they can maybe even start training in the first quarter of next year?
Sure. We can jump ahead of that in a second, but I'll show you the map and the coverage areas where we already know that we're operating. If it's a matter of a new market, it can be a little tight on the timeline, but we will work to do that quickly. I think the first question I would have in response is, are you open to remote work? If you're open to remote staffing, we can turn it on in January very easily. And the next step will be, when we get to the slide, reaching out to the person who's closest to you geographically, who can work with you to get the contract signed, and we can start the planning process with you for what the classroom training is that's required and what your onboarding is. January would be the start for getting apprentices into the classroom training. And then the classroom duration is dependent on the role that they're in. So there are some that are as low as 12 weeks, and of course, others that are going to be as long as 20 weeks. And so you're not going to get them on the job until probably somewhere between March and May. But we can absolutely start the process and get you the talent in January.
Great.
So what you see here, sorry, before I move on, other questions?
Not right now. You're good.
Okay. So on the operating locations, part of what we started with in Washington State was the pilot program 5 years ago. It actually launched with its first apprentices in November of 2016, after we spent about 1.5 years in development with companies here. And we started with 20 plus companies at the table that ranged from the tech sector in Microsoft, Amazon, Zillow, Tableau, F5, but also Blue Cross Blue Shield, Primera Blue Cross here, and Russell Investments on the financial services side, all weighing in on building out those taxonomies on the previous slide. the US Department of Labor saw that level of engagement and saw what was transpiring, and that we kind of rocked their boat a little bit on the idea that everybody would do it independently. And they said, okay, if we're going to do that, then we need to take this greenfield opportunity to expand onto the national footprint. That was as much driven by the DOL saying, let's expand this program, as it was by the employers saying, I need this product in more than just Washington State. And so what we do at Apprenti is build the continuity that when you operationalize it, you do it one way. And that the role competencies are going into the same definition everywhere. So if I'm a software developer in Massachusetts, it's going to look exactly the same if I'm in Nevada or California. And the way it operates will look the same. And therefore, that continuity should exist across sectors just as much as across state lines. So what we're able to do now on employer demand is meet you where you need us, and we will cultivate that pipeline. We can also plug and play into systems and operations that you have already in existence within your organizations, your companies. So if there are non-traditional talent pipelines that you've been cultivating and trying to make a determination about how to scale that into your organization, we can facilitate that as well. It also works for incumbent worker retraining. And we have a number of companies that are taking people out of lower technical skills or non-technical skills and repurposing that talent into their tech departments, whether they've been on furlough or simply right now you have a greater need in another area of the business, or you have people at entry-level jobs and you're looking for ways to create that talent internally because these are folks that you've already had a relationship with and clearly hired. As we said earlier, apprenticeship is competency over pedigree. It has very strong outcomes because of the systemic approach to it. We have 95% that complete the classroom training. So if you think of that as a comparative to, for example, code academies, there is no pre-qualifier getting into a code academy for most, not all, but for most code academies, other than did my check clear to get into that class. So part of what we're doing is a quantified and qualified pre-screening of candidates that we bring to the company, and then we help facilitate getting them through that class. So you're making an investment in getting people to jobs that have a high capacity for learning and the highest potential for success. And then 83% of those are getting retained directly by you at the conclusion, but the rest are being turned back into the ecosystem. So the industries as a whole will benefit, and that investment will pay dividends down the road. Our focus has been primarily on women, veterans, and underrepresented minorities in our sector, highly African-American, Hispanic, mixed race. This is a on-ramp for people who, frequently have a degree of some kind, just not in our sector, but are looking for a way to get into a long-term career, but not in a position to go back to school and start over. We also have a lot of people who tried college but didn't finish, and they don't want to make that financial investment and have the capacity to do this. The credentials that they're getting are ones we all recognize as an industry when they say they've completed these certifications. We ask for that during the application process, even today on a more traditional side. So this is helping to scale what the industry already knows how to consume and just do it at a more accelerated pace. And again, demand driven. It's based on your wants, needs, and desires, and is as flexible on how to get them to job as you can be.
Excuse me, Jen, we have a couple questions maybe before we get into the next slide. They're asking if you can talk a little bit more about incumbent training, especially given our last question about getting things started in 2021. Does an incumbent training program allow us to get started sooner?
Yes, it can. There are different ways that it can be handled. We have a couple of employers. I'll use a couple of examples here. One is Amazon, where they're trying to move folks from their entry-level positions in the warehouse into cloud roles. And what they do is open up a certain number of recs for those cloud roles, and then they open up the application process through the Apprenti portal for the folks that are in the warehouse that want an opportunity to skill and move into those jobs. And they may have 200 people that will come and start the process. Maybe 100 of them will complete the skills assessment online. And that is not a whiteboarding or code writing process, but really more math, algebraic, geometry, along with logic and critical thinking. Are they good problem solvers? And then they pass some soft skills assessments, and that's the quantitative, and we do a qualitative screening. And then what we give back to employers is a 2-to-1 ratio, typically. And in their case, we've gotten through enough cohorts with them, we can be even more efficient than that. So we'll send back the 30 to 40 best candidates out of their own applicant pool to fill those 20 slots. And then there's 2 different ways that can go. We've had experience where they've been released to go to class for the accelerated period of time, but are still on staff. We've also got a situation where they've worked part-time and gone to class part-time. The classroom training takes longer in that environment to get them on the job. And we have another employer right now that is looking at this as a possible, we'll do a partial accelerated training of about 8 to 10 weeks. And then they will come to job, and then they'll be released to go back to class for another 4 weeks and then come back to job. So there are a number of ways that we can work through that. In Amazon's case, they did 4 10s and released them for class on Friday, and they went to classroom immersively on Friday and Saturday. It is very difficult to sustain that on the part of the apprentice working full-time still. So we don't advise that. Not saying we can't do it, just not been good experience so far.
We do have one more question. I'm going to pose it, and you can maybe answer it as you go through the next couple of slides. And that is like, really, what is the best way to get, or the easiest place to get started, to get some movement built out inside the company, so we can go from talking about things to getting things started?
Terrific question. So I think it was said best in the last panel, looking for the executive stakeholder. And I think even Yvonne talked about this at the very beginning. Having an executive stakeholder, and Yvonne had to kind of backtrack to get folks to engage. I find the person who controls the headcount and the budget, and therefore the pain of that job going unfilled, is usually the first person. If they buy in, it becomes an edict for HR to find a way through the process. On the previous slide, we've got photos of everybody on the team that you would be working with to get started. But one of those is Al Cave. He's on the team. Al is very adept at working with HR departments on getting over those hurdles and talking them through some of the challenges that they might have in getting that, either the buy-in or getting over the hurdles and obstacles to get out of the way and get going. And having an executive sponsor. And in many cases, as James mentioned, it's a culture decision. If the organization is making public commitments about shifting culture, about diverse hiring, they're usually looking for a solution. And so that executive sponsor leader will come into it saying, great, we have some way of backing up what we've been saying now. And so that kind of gives and creates the latitude for moving forward with an organization who can help you operationalize it and help you build out the business case for why you should internalize it in the long run.
That was great.
Any other questions there on that front?
Yeah, we're good right now.
If you saw on the previous slide, there were a number of folks and faces that gave you their geographies. Al Cave, who is listed on here as a prime contact. If you did not see, or you do not see your market reflected here, again, that does not mean we do not have applicants from those folks or those markets. So we can still accommodate a great many other markets. These are just the ones where we have active employers. And Al will be the kind of core triage for being able to help you get started with us. And that's acave@apprenticareers.org. And you'll see here, we have a number of organizations and affiliates that work with us in respective markets. So please note, you'll see some different email addresses up here. They're not all Apprenti Careers, but they are affiliated directly with us, and the process runs consistently market by market. So that will be transparent to you. You won't see any difference no matter what market you do this in or choose to operate.
Excellent. Well, you won't believe this, but we are right on time.
Yeah.
We've gotten through most of the questions, and the chat is still going strong. Want to thank everybody for being here. But Jen, do you have any last minute shout outs or heads up or suggestions, or more importantly, that call to action?
Final call to action. This is the time of year where most companies are doing your business planning. This is the time to be contemplating how you'll parse off your headcount for next year and how you will accommodate this in your budget. And it is a commitment of a headcount, whether you internalize it or you go the contractor route, as Yvonne talked about early on. So making that commitment now to parse off that headcount is really important. And it will save time for you to implement in next year. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to get that process moving with you very quickly and help you make the business case internally.
Great. We will definitely be sending a link out to everybody who, an email out to everybody who attended, just to make sure we keep the door wide open. We share the presentation with you and answer any other questions anyone might have. So with that, I am going to call us to close, unless Lauren, you have any last minute words of wisdom? Putting it on you.
On behalf of all of Apprenti, thank you for joining us and tuning in. And we hope to continue the conversations. I think there was so much shared that we think this will continue to evolve and help support you and your hiring needs. So thank you.